Economics for war or of war. One of the issues both sides had at the beginning of the war is they need millions and millions of dollars. Wars are expensive. You have to pay your soldiers. You have to buy their equipment. You have to feed them, transportation, things like that. So we'll see that both sides did three different things to raise more money for the war. Um, they depended on each of these three in different ways, and I'll show you that at the end. So number one, both sides started an income tax. An income tax, we've talked about taxes earlier in this year. To this point in your lives, you've only paid a sales tax. An income tax is tax on money earned. It's a job tax. And ironically, this was the first income tax in American history. And surprisingly, after the war, the income tax went away until about 1915 or so. The second way, both sides did print more money. The government controls the printing press, so they can print up more money. However, the downside of this, and the South found out this the hard way, it led to inflation. We've spoken about inflation this year. Inflation is when your money isn't worth as much. And we look at our dollar bill and we're like, well, it looks the same, it feels the same. How can it not be worth as much? As you guys know, when you go to the store, your dollar doesn't buy as much because prices have gone up. That's how we know we're going through inflation. The South did a lot more of this, which was disastrous. The final way both sides raised some money was by selling war bonds. A war bond, in very, very simple terms, is a loan. A war bond is when a citizen loans money to the government and it's repaid later with interest. The way this would work, I want to be patriotic and I want to lend money to the Northern government to help win the war. So I would go to a bank and I buy a $5 bond. So that money goes to the government. They use that to build or to buy a uniform or to make a gun. And then 5, 10 years later, bonds can last a certain amount of time. But let's say 5 years later, the government pays me back my $5 plus I make interest on it. So I make a little bit money. They have to pay interest on them because otherwise people probably wouldn't loan money if you don't make any money off of it. What happened to the price of goods in both the North and the South? Prices throughout the war went up. Another reason they went up, inflation was going on, but the supply of goods was also going down. So things like food or anything made out of metal, anything that the military needed, those prices went up because the supply of food and metal was going down because the military needed those things to win the war. So supply was going down, inflation was going up. So that's kind of a double whammy. Prices are going to go up dramatically. By the end of the war, the South, their economy was completely destroyed. Their money was worthless. And they still had dollar bills, but you go to the store and those dollar bills weren't buying you anything. A lot of places in the South, by the end of the war, because their money is worthless, they're trading, they're bartering for things. So I'll show you, we'll close this down by showing you this. I know it's a little bit hard to read. This is showing you how each side raised money. This is the North side, this is the South. You can see the North side, 65% of their money came from bonds, which is a great way to raise money. And then 15% was through printing money, 20% was through taxation. Meanwhile, the South, 60% of their money that they raised was through printing money. And this next graphic shows you the consequence of this. So this is the value of the Northern dollar. It goes down. So they struggled with inflation, but by the end of the war, it's starting to go back up, where the blue line, it's going down to basically nothing. This final thing, I know it's really small. This is Confederate prices. This is what people paid for things in 1863 and 1865 in the South. So in 1863, a pound of beef cost you $1. By 1865, that same pound of beef, the beef hasn't changed, is now $8. So prices went up by 8. Butter from 5 to 15. Cornmeal, $6 to $100 per bushel. And finally, flour, a barrel of flour, $30 in 1863, $1,000